All right, how's it going, everyone? I decided to change my little light behind me, make it a little red, change it up some. So one of my subscribers has kept asking me if I could kind of review his code, and I decided I'm going to try to do that. I don't know if I'm going to do like any type of refactoring because I just don't have the energy right now to do that, but I'm going to try to run his project, and off the bat, there's no README that explains how to run it, unless it's nested in here. I guess it is, let's see. But I think he's just using next, so there shouldn't be much to actually, I need to run. Let's just get started. So he has a Docker compose file, which I believe he's using just to set up a database. So I'm gonna go ahead and say Docker compose up. I don't know if I even have Docker compose installed. I do. Okay. So if you don't know what Docker compose is, it's basically a way to generate a YAML file that has a bunch of definitions of different Docker containers that you can run locally, or you can kind of do this on a production server if you want to, but it's basically a way to like specify all the different dependencies of your project, such as like Elasticsearch, your databases, whatever, and it will spin up containers on your machine when you do Docker compose up. So in this case, we do have one Postgres database, and I should be able to access, I think it's saying there's something running on localhost 8090. Okay. So yeah, I have a database set up, and let's see if I can actually log in here. App, database is called DB. Postgres. I never used this before, so we'll kind of figure out if this even works. Yeah, so I don't know. We don't have any tables, and that's probably because he might be using Prisma, and we might need to actually create some tables. So let's go into a new terminal, and let's kind of further dive into his project to see if we can get this stuff running. So let's go into the portfolio project, and I think he might be using Yarn. Let's see if there's a Yarn lock anywhere. There's not, so I'm gonna do an npm install. And I'm on node 18, so hopefully that doesn't cause any type of issues. I don't know if he's using 16 or 18. I'm hoping he's on 18. I don't know if the README says anything about that, but yeah, this is I think it's a project he's been kind of working on for a while, so it might be a little larger than the other refactoring stuff I've done. But I'm more or less just going to talk about the stuff, and I'm not really going to do like any type of refactoring. Let's look at his Prisma schema real quick. I think he put some good work into this. Like, I don't know if he drew out an ER diagram. I would like to see that in the README or any type of docs folder. Sometimes you can make a docs folder. You can put like design decisions in the docs folder. You can put diagrams in the docs folder. And that'll really just take your project to the next level, because when someone like me comes in and tries to read it, I don't know how all these entities interrelate, right? So an ER diagram somewhere in this whole project. Wow, he has one. So I spoke too soon. Beautiful. So this is what he's building out. He has a user. A user can have posts. I believe he's building like a social media site. A post can have comments. Has a user post, one-to-many, one-to-many. You can make a list and tasks, other social media. So I don't know. I don't think he actually has a next.js application created yet. Like if you look at the actual pages, he just has like some filler stuff. Like he doesn't really have any type of functionality. I could try running it, npm run dev, and see what does he actually have with his next app, which he has an email and a password. So maybe we can try to figure out how to log in. We also need to run Prisma. So let's go to the portfolio project and say npx Prisma push db. I think it's how you do it, or it's db push. Migrate dev. I might have to set a .env file. So that's another thing I'd recommend doing. Like if you're going to ask for feedback, like make sure you have everything lined up with like, how do you get this thing started? Because it doesn't say anywhere like, how do I set up database URL? So I guess you're just assuming I'm smart enough to get it going, which hopefully I am. So let's go ahead and just make a .env file, which another thing I recommend doing is having like a sample env file. So if someone were to clone your repo, they can actually just like copy and paste your sample env file for others to use as well. Let me just make one .env. Database URL is, I don't know what this would be. Maybe in the Docker Compose it might say. Yeah, let's go to next.js. All right, let's go to Prisma. Let's go to Postgres example database URL. Let's see if they give us anything here. Postgres. Let's try this. So let's just do Postgres. User was, what was the user? Docker Compose is app and DB. App DB. Host was localhost. Port was, guess that. Let's see if this works. Let's try running it. Enter a new name for the migration. So that's kind of a red flag too. Like, I don't know why it's telling me to make a new migration script. He should have already ran these migrations and those scripts should have been created. So I'll just make a test one, and I guess that'll make a new migration script that's doing what? Like it's doing a lot. So I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. But we can go over to that little like admin dashboard thing. Although I'm not sure why he's using this, because I think Prisma has like a Prisma Studio, but it looks like it created all the tables and stuff, so that's pretty cool. And we have like a user table here. I don't know if we can actually log in here, so let's try some logging in, test at example.com, testing. Let's see if this actually does anything. I guess I could do sign up. Bob testing at example.com, password, confirm password. I can't, oh, never mind. Anyway, so I don't think he actually has any of this stuff implemented. I think he was telling me that he was working on the back end, working on the database schema, working on the, what does it called? The GraphQL stuff, which I don't have any experience with GraphQL. I'll be honest with you. I don't even know how I would connect to his GraphQL stuff. So I'm hoping he has some type of GraphQL endpoint that I can hit. So if I look at his API and just go to like GraphQL, I think there's a way to like hit it. Let's see, API GraphQL. Does that give me a nice dashboard I can use? It does not. Yeah, so I mean, you're just watching like a live. This is me trying this stuff for the first time. So I'm gonna run into issues. I'm gonna struggle trying to figure out how to run his stuff. I've never used GraphQL before, so like, one advice I'd give him is like, you need to delete this whole README and rewrite your README from scratch. That actually explains what your project's doing. Have screenshots, put links to your ER diagram, because I don't even think you have your like project overview image that we looked at, right? Your project plan, like, do you have a PNG? No. So it's important to have a README. It's important to document what you're doing so that other people can come in and like hit the ground running, versus just having the default next documentation here. Like, this isn't useful, I'll be honest, but I'm not gonna spend too much more time complaining about that. So I think he's using like Apollo server, how to get the user interface. I think there's like some built-in way to like get that GraphQL pretty viewer that you can do queries on. I don't remember what it is, what port. I mean, we'll figure this out. Localhost 4000? No. Let's go to Apollo server next.js setup. And hopefully there's a blog post. Is there a link or a URL that you can go to get the actual Apollo client? And this is what I'm looking for. Maybe. Does that make sense what I'm looking for? Like, usually I think like there's like an endpoint or URL you can hit, and I feel like I'm dumb because I don't know this, but honestly, I'd never use GraphQL other than like a 30-minute little video I played around with. So GraphQL Apollo server. I'm kind of curious how he actually runs this stuff. Anyway, let me just review on something that I can talk about. So he's been trying to do like clean architecture in his project, and some feedback I gave him was like, in your resolvers, which, where is that even defined? All right. So in his, I guess these are the resolvers here. My feedback for him would be this function here is kind of a controller. And this controller, I mean, I personally would probably move it to a separate function. Like, I don't like having one file that has all your logic in it. Like, I would probably make separate files for this entire callback function here, if possible. But I'm not a GraphQL expert, so I don't want to kind of teach something that's going against the grain with how you're supposed to use GraphQL. But typically, like, I would have, if you're trying to follow clean architecture, I would have a controller file. Okay. Your controller file is the thing that's responsible for calling your use case. And I'm not seeing a use case being called here. I see just you're accessing the repository right off the bat. So this is your controller technically. Your controller should be saying like find user by ID interactor or something. By the way, in clean architecture, there's use cases and interactors. That's the same thing. It's just like the same name for the same thing. But like I would probably pass in like a user ID of like args ID. And that's what I would do. Like I would have your query invoke an interactor. The interactor would be a separate file with a separate function that invokes your repository. Because at some point you're going to need to add authentication to some of these. You might need to add authorization. And let's say only some users can fetch users by IDs, then you want to be able to add the authorization inside your interactor. But that's my advice there. I would not have these controllers invoking the repository directly because that's kind of going against how you're supposed to do clean architecture, in my opinion. So like I would probably make a new folder here called like interactors, to be honest with you. And repositories, we call them persistence. Like I usually call them persistence when I do code, but it doesn't really matter. Some people call these things services. You definitely want entities. Entities is like standard across like all types of layered architecture. And then interactors, like I said, like I would probably make like I don't know, find user by ID interactor. Find user by ID interactor dot yes. And that thing could export a find user by ID interactor. And you might be watching this and be like, dude, this is so much extra stuff just to like call it endpoint. And it is, but like the point is you're trying to follow a standard structure for your application, right? So I don't want any of this interactor to know anything about GraphQL. I just need it to take in a user ID, which can be like a string, like so. And this thing could be in charge of kind of invoking the repository, I guess. So we do that, import the repository, pass it the user ID, and I guess you need the DB here. So maybe this needs like a DB for dependency injection. I don't really know what this is. It's called context. So I'll do like a DB here, DB context. That comes from Apollo client, maybe. I don't think I'm doing that right. What context is this? This is Prisma. So this should come from Prisma, not from what I just imported it from. By the way, like, hope you guys are enjoying this video. I didn't really have anything. Is that the one I want? Parsing expression expected. Let me put a semicolon there. All right, there we go. Now this looks kind of ugly, so I'd probably put this in like a new line or just abstract this out. Like we could define this as an interface. So I could say like interface of, I can't type today, interface, I find user by ID interactor or something. If you wanted to do that, and then typically you could do like a, well, I guess by default, like TypeScript's gonna infer your type. So you could just do kind of what we do in React as well. Like this could just be a type of args. Again, I'm a TypeScript noob, so some of the things I'm doing, you'll probably be like, dude, why are you doing it that way? But just do whatever works and keep it consistent throughout your entire application. Okay, so if this is the approach you want to take for kind of typing your arguments to a function, then do it this way. If you want to use interfaces, then use interfaces, but just keep it consistent so that every interactor has like the same standard. But what I would kind of do is like I would go here and I would call the find user by ID interactor. I would pass it user ID of args ID, and then I would pass it DB of context DB. Okay. And that is what I would kind of do to make this more clean architecture like. But it's up to you. You don't have to do that stuff if you think it's just overkill. But now you actually have interactors, and the interactors could potentially do more things in the future. Right now, this is super simple and it seems dumb to do, but you might have interactors that need to do a bunch of different stuff. For example, you might have an interactor for when you create a post, or what is this? Yeah, okay, mutations, like when you add a user, maybe you need to send off emails, maybe you need to validate some inputs, maybe you need to um, set up a bunch of different stuff in your database, right? So your interactor is going to be a lot larger for different mutations typically that are going to be doing a lot more stuff. So you want to be able to split that out into a separate interactor file so you can easily unit test it. And then the dependency injection allows you to easily mock these things out. Instead of having to use like jest.mock, which I always forget the syntax, is kind of I don't know. I just don't like using it. I rather just have these dependencies that this thing depends on be passed in instead of having to deal with just mocks. Probably want to return there as well. Okay, so that's kind of my feedback for the clean architecture stuff. Let's look at the repositories though, because I didn't even look at it. So let's look at a post repository and let's see what he's doing here. So I think he is doing something a little bit different than I would. Like the repository should not know about your entities, in my opinion. So I'm not sure what's going on here. All posts data, post repository, create, update. Okay, he has different folders for posts. That's good, I guess. I would say, like, if you see the consistency between the names of the files, you are using proper case, like bookmark repository, but then you're using like snake case, if that's what it's called. So I would keep, I don't know why you have all these different ways. Like here, well, that one is the one I created, so let me not comment on that. But I don't know. Maybe I would recommend like I would probably make the snake case as well, or I would revert these and make them match. But typically, what I do, it's like, you know what? Let me not comment on that. You might have a special way that you're doing some stuff. But I do find it kind of strange that you're following two different like naming conventions for your files. You're using hyphens here sometimes. But anyway, so in post, let's look at create post real quick and see like what is he doing here. So he goes to the user repository, he calls find one, and find one is calling this, which is calling Prisma, and then returning a user entity. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't think that you should have entities. Persistence really shouldn't know about entities. Entities and your interactors are the only things that should kind of know about each other. If you go to the clean architecture, like diagram with that little circle stuff, your entities are in the very center, right? And your use cases are the things that require entities. But your persistent is on like a different layer outside of all that. So it's kind of weird that your presenter, which is your, actually not your presenter, your, technically what we're looking at, the repositories, those are DB, right? So your repositories, maybe you can call them gateways, I guess, but those things are requiring your entities, which is kind of violating clean architecture because I believe you're not supposed to go over like layers. Like you're supposed to like only use cases are the things that require entities. I could be wrong there though, so definitely call me out. But we have a repository method that's supposed to create a post. That is going to fetch back a user from the database. And if the user is not found, we throw an error. And we create the post and then we return the entity. You know, I think I recall talking to this subscriber, and I think he might have been putting all of his interactor code as his repository methods. So this seems like more like interactor code. Like if you try to create a post on a user who doesn't exist, that's like a business rule, I believe. Like I think your business rules should throw an error because you're trying to create a post on some user that doesn't exist. But yeah, that's kind of my recommendation. So like, This code I think should be in like an interactor. Now bear with me, I'm just kind of showing an example. But user repository find one. Let me do this. Okay, so this, if you were to do it this way, like you would have a method for like, I'm not a fan of this repositories approach, honestly. Like you can do what you want, but I would rather just have a method called like get user by ID. That's it. That's all I need this thing to do. And then that could be a repository method. That could be a persistence method. It doesn't matter. Just import it. And then I get the user. If the user doesn't exist, then I throw an error. Then I would have another persistence method called persist post, or you can call it create post, whatever you want to call it. And this thing should only care about post data. And I guess we'd pretend like a post data would come in here, right? Or just a post. So that's kind of how I would do this stuff. Like I would have your interactors invoke your persistence layers, and they would take the things that come back. Like this could be like a const user entity is equal to new user. You pass it to the user. This would validate it when it's constructed. And then if, you know, user didn't exist, I guess you do that up here, wouldn't you? And then you do the same thing. Like this would be a post entity is equal to new entity of post. And I know there's errors all over the place because obviously most of this stuff isn't even created. I'm just kind of explaining what I would do. But your persistence layer should not know about entities. It should just return you either a data transfer object, a DTO, or just some raw JSON, right? That's it. Just some JSON. It has some key value pairs, and you need to take that JSON and convert it to an entity here so that you can do some type of validation on it. And I mean, if you want to take it a step further, like you could have user entities. You could say like add post. And that could take in a post entity. And then you could basically persist this again if you wanted to. So I could say like update user, pass it the user entity. And then technically your persistence shouldn't know about user entities. So you probably want to use some type of DTO here or whatever. But I'm just kind of giving you an overview of what I would probably do. You don't have to do what I'm explaining. Let's look at your entities real quick. So yeah, I don't really do the convention with the underscores. I mean, it works fine. I think there's actually a way in TypeScript, I guess ES6, you can like make stuff private by doing the hash symbol, but this is TypeScript, so like we get the private keyword out of the box, so that works pretty good. He's doing the constructor. Inside the constructor, he is validating the things passed in. That's good. I think this is good. Anytime you construct the entity, you want it to validate the data to make sure that people aren't creating bad entities before they persist them into your database. The data integrity is really important when you're building applications, and you don't want stuff to be saved to your database that like should have never gotten there, because it can cause a lot of issues down the road where you're like trying to, you know, scratch your head figuring out how did this data get here? It shouldn't be in the database like this. And it turns out like you go down this path of code to figure out, okay, what happened in this instance because we forgot to validate this data because we didn't wrap it in the entity and validate it. But yeah, I think your entities look pretty good. If you ever have a need, like sometimes your methods can be more beefy. Like let's say you had a user and you want to attach a post to a user. Maybe you already do that. Let's go down here. So you have your users here, and I'm not a fan of all the getters and setters, I'll be honest with you. I know a lot of people like using getters and setters. I just feel like it's a lot of overhead for something simple, but this is probably the proper way to do it, using getters and setters, because you've abstracted away your public interfaces from how the data is stored internally. So I think this looks pretty good. But like, for example, you have posts here. Like, where do you have the ability to add a post, right? And maybe you don't need to. Also, I guess my question is, where do you validate your post, because I'm guessing these are all different entities too, right? The user is made up of different lists entities, post entities, bookmark entities. And if I were to create a new user and pass it some bogus likes, does this entity actually validate the likes that were passed in? But I guess you just default them to empty arrays here, and I wonder where you set them. I guess you have a setter down here somewhere, right? Get likes. Anyway, yeah, I don't have too much to complain about your entities, other than like you do. Okay, you're doing the private hash symbol here, but then in other entities, you're doing the private keyword. I would shore that up. Like, pick one or the other. Don't mix and match. Like this hash symbol, that's an ES6 approach, I believe, and this is an ES6 entity. And then you're using TypeScript entities here, I believe, like this. So I would maybe get that all consistent. But yeah, I think your entities look pretty good. I'm sure there's other people who can probably elaborate more and give you more feedback on that. But I don't see any issues with it as long as you keep on validating. Like all this stuff here, like where's the validation for when you set the email and the name and the password? Like, does your user require to have a password that's 8 characters long or has special characters? You should have some validation on all of these fields. Maybe you do it at a different point, which it looks like you do it in the setter, which is cool. But what if someone like creates your user entity and passes a bad user here? You're not doing any validation here. But maybe you are, because maybe I just don't know. Maybe these are setters. This is an ES6 setter. So basically this invocation here is going to actually go down here and call the setter. If it does, then I'm just confusing myself, and I think you have it working perfectly fine. But just keep that in mind. You just want to make sure your entities are always like validated and good to go before you start like persisting them. And again, I'm not like a clean architecture expert, so don't like treat me like I'm Uncle Bob or something. I'm just some guy who's taken read a book and tried to like wrap my head around it, but it's not easy to kind of wrap your head around sometimes. Yeah, so you got your repositories, which I think would be good. I think just if you can somehow get the entities out of these repository methods, I think it would be better, in my opinion. But I mean, maybe, I don't know, if you read a blog post and someone says you should do this, like your repository should return the entities, maybe it's fine. It's just not the way I've kind of done it on my projects, but that's just me. I guess let me kind of further explain why. So let's say your user is actually, your user data, where's your find one user? Let's say your user is actually split up into multiple databases. Let's say all the posts are stored in some type of graph database, and all of your users are stored in like Postgres, right? There are applications as they scale, you have different needs for different databases, but you're treating this as like, I can create a full entity from this database. But down the road, you might not know if all the posts come from the user or something. You know what I'm saying? So like having these things know about creating the entities, I feel like that's more of an interactor thing, and the interactor should know what persistence methods to call to kind of build up that full entity. But yeah, let's look at the components. Got some components here. I've been kind of focusing a lot on the clean architecture backend stuff, but it seems good. I don't know GraphQL. I wanted to kind of hit your endpoints to test it out, but I don't know what I'm doing, so I'll skip that. All right, you got you're using Chakra UI, so that's pretty cool. Got a sidebar, you got a sign up page. Link to this. This is a red flag. I would not have hard-coded localhost inside your links. Like you need to pull these out into like constants or some type of a configuration file called like get base URL or get origin. Because when you go to production, all your stuff's going to break because you have it all hard-coded. In fact, I think since you're using Next, you could just do this. Like you don't need to have this in here. You know what I mean? Like you don't need the localhost. So I would do that. Let's look through some more stuff. Okay, you got your posts, you got your props, got your function. I will ask, do you have ESLint on this project? And what roles do you have? Yeah, so I would find the roles that you really like, because I think you don't really have that many roles set up, right? So the fact that I can put like all this on one line, I personally don't like that. I would find rules that force your things, your objects, to be on separate lines, because it's much more readable. I'm sure there's other stuff, like I could probably change this to a single quote and it's not telling me to correct anything. Like, that's not good. I shouldn't have strings with double quotes and strings with single quotes. So I would fine tune your ESLint setup to make sure all this is like squared away. I mean, it's only one person coding on this code base, so it's like they have it's going to be easy for them to keep it consistent. But if you had a lot of people working on this project, like, you might get really, really different code commits coming in with different styles. Yeah, and I mean, honestly, anywhere you have like stuff like this could be an ESLint rule. You have a variable called accepted files, and then at a higher level in your application, you have accepted files. So I would probably find a way to like rename this one to like, I don't know, you could do like an underscore if you want. Because like right now I read through this code, I don't know if this is referring to this one or if this is referring to this one. So overloaded variable names is not a good thing to have, but there's an ESLint rule. You can kind of set that up to ignore. Yeah, let's just keep looking through this stuff. I don't really know if there's too much to kind of talk about. You got your lib has Prisma, you got your validators. I guess these are just shared validator functions you're using in your entities to validate some stuff, which I guess that's cool. Is there anything I'm missing? Prisma pages, API, sign up. I know your pages are kind of like slim. There's not much in here. Let's kind of look. So you got a sign in page, and that authentication, register, handle, submit, authentication, inbox, register. I would say some of the namings on some of these, like I would probably like this handle authentication, just so like at the top I know this is a method that's actually being invoked from the DOM when someone clicks on something, versus just calling it authentication like off the bat. I don't know what the heck that is. Like, is it a helper function? Is it being used somewhere else? But the moment you put handle or some type of convention in front of your variable names, someone coming through it can read it and know exactly. Like, you're doing it here is submitting. I know this is probably a Boolean without even looking at the type. So there are some conventions that are really nice to put on top, put in front of your variables, like some prefixes. Don't know what this is doing. Like, if there's 4 things in this object, then it's the sign up page. Otherwise, it's the sign in page. That seems like a really big code smelt to me. I don't know what this 4 magic number is, and I don't think you should be determining which API endpoint you should be hitting based on some type of length thing. I guess you're checking like how many objects are in the form, which I don't know. I'd try to find a different way to do that. There probably is a better way to do that. You could have 2 different pages that handle the sign in and the sign out, so you don't have this like weird ternary thing. Like, I know you're trying to dry up code and not duplicate code, but I bet you there's like more complexity where you hide and show things based on if you're signing up or if you're like registering. Yeah, because I don't even see like a register page. I think you're just trying to like reuse the same page for both of your approaches, which I'm not a fan of. Like, just have duplicate code, have 2 different pages, or have 2 different components. One could be a sign up component, one could be a sign in component, and those are completely isolated. And you can kind of use utility functions in between them if you want to kind of clean up some code. what is going on here? So you're doing a fetch and then you're checking if the status is 200. And if it is, go to the dashboard. I thought fetch, like, I could be wrong. Is it Axis the one that throws an exception if it's not a 200 or a 300? Fetch might not throw any errors, so you actually have to check the response. But is this really a promise too? Like response status, is that a promise? I thought it would just be a number. I don't think you need to wait here, to be honest, but I'm not going to run your code to check that. I think you can also say like is okay. I thought there was a way to say like is okay, but yeah, I think it's just okay. If it's okay, then you can just go to the router page. That's another approach you can do instead of checking the status codes. If everything seemed like it was okay, that means like you didn't get a 400 or 500 error. Just go to the dashboard. Delete these console logs if you're not using them. Again, like I think I've kind of gone over this a lot in my other refactoring videos. Your component should not know about fetch. So you should not have the fetch keyword in any of your components, any of your pages. Abstract this away into either a custom function, like pull that out into a different folder called like, I don't know, you call it API, you can call it proxies, you can call it services or something. And I would make a function that kind of abstracts all this away called, like, what is this doing? Oh, it is, again, like I read through this code, I'm not sure what this is doing because I have to go back up a level to understand if this is a sign up or sign in. I'm guessing this is trying to do a sign up or sign in based on something. But if you could just abstract this away, honestly, and just say like, register proxy, that's it. And then you could pass in your data here. And then this thing doesn't have to know about status codes, right? This thing could just do an await. And if it didn't throw an exception, you could just push, right? So abstract that stuff away, I would say. And if you don't care about the response at this point, like you can kind of clean this up. This thing was the thing that knows about the URL. So I guess you could say like if status is equal to sign up, do something, otherwise do something else. And I'll just say like sign in proxy. Like that. So this is a little bit cleaner. You don't want your components knowing about where which backend API endpoints you have to hit. Like that's kind of an implementation detail you want to abstract away from your components. I also don't understand why we're saying handle submit, handles authentication, passage in E. Do you need E here? I see what you're doing. Although I'm not sure why you're calling it a function. I feel like there's something weird going on here. Like I'd have to read more about what's going on. You have a handle submit, which, oh, I guess this is a, are you using form hooks? React hook forms? Okay. That's probably why you're doing that. So handle submit, you invoke it. And then I have to go read up on like how React hook forms work, how this library works to see if you're doing it right or not. But it just seems like a smell. This seems like a really big smell to me. The fact that you're calling a function and then calling it again. But what do I know? I don't really know that library too well. Errors.name, type. What is name? Okay, you're mapping over it, and for every time you get a name, you're checking to see if there's errors. I feel like this whole thing could be abstracted away into a helper component because I feel like this is something that you're going to use in every single page that has a form. Like it looks like you're basically checking if the backend threw an error saying that something was required, you're showing some error text. I would see myself drawing this up and pulling into a helper component because you're probably going to use this a lot in other places. That's just my opinion. Yeah, I wish there's more pages I can kind of talk about, and I wish I knew more about GraphQL to be more useful. But overall, I mean, I think you're doing a great job. I would like to actually let me know when like you get this stuff going. I know you have Storybook going, but I don't see any Storybook like components. Oh, you do. All right, let me just run Storybook real quick. If I can remember how to. Storybook. npm run Storybook. Is that how you do it? npm run Storybook. npm run build Storybook. What page am I in? I did change a bunch of stuff all throughout this application. Let me stash. Let me try running it again because I probably broke some code. Nope. npm run build Storybook. Can I build it? I can't. Yeah, I don't know why I can't run Storybook. I'm sure there's some simple thing I just need to do. But it'd be nice to be able to see your Storybook stuff. It looks like you have a lot of things set up to kind of share your components. Let me read through this code real quick. Maybe it tells me exactly wrong. No configuration files have been found for your configure. There's no .storybook. Storybook needs either main or config file. Okay. Don't know what that means. So I guess we're not going to be able to share that on this little video, but what is a PUML file? Oh, I guess this thing was used to generate your project plan. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I'd move these to a docs folder. Like move all your documentation, your designs, your choices. It's good to document why you did certain things and put them in like a README or in your docs folder. And I've already talked on that stuff as well. And it looks like you have some test data. How does this work? Post. I don't know what this file does. Again, like you could probably add in README explaining like what does test data do? Where is it used? Okay, you're using it in your tests. So you do have some tests. Let me at least try running that real quick. npm, let me just try npm run test. That should be the default one. It should just work. And it looks like everything crashed. Wonder why. Let me undo this one. Don't know why I had the migration there, honestly, but yeah, so your tests are failing. I don't know why. Cannot find module pages API server. So I would say that maybe hit me up again in a month or so when you make more progress and you have more pages and like you have a good README that explains how I can read this, how I can get this going, how I can run your tests, how I can start up Storybook, because off the bat, like I'm trying to run stuff and stuff just keeps crashing. So I don't know if there's bugs in your code, if I'm doing something wrong, if I shouldn't even be trying to run this yet. And I don't want to waste too much time trying to get stuff working. So I'm going to go ahead and just end this video. I hope I kind of explained some stuff and gave you some more feedback of how you can do stuff a little bit different or better. But I always like to be able to run the code to make sure I understand exactly what's going on. You got some tests here and it looks like they're doing some stuff. And it would have been nice to be able to run these, like see how they're working, but maybe I just need to have the app running, which I think I already do. So anyway, if you enjoyed watching this, be sure to give me a thumbs up, subscribe, join my Discord. Have a good day and happy coding.